Good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed my stay here so far. My name is Kofi Owusu. Just a bit of history around my name. So if you are familiar with names in Ghana, from the tribe I come from, we have what we call day names. So before a child is named officially, the day that you are born, it gives you your name automatically. So we have 7 names for the boys, 7 names for the girls. So Kofi, you may have heard of Kofi Annan. Yeah. So Kofi is a boy born on a Friday. So my parents decided to maintain that as my first name and gave me the others. So when you see any Kofi from Ghana, that means the guy was born on a Friday. So maybe after the presentation, I'll give you all your Ghanaian names, if you know the days that you were born on. All right. So the educational system in Ghana has evolved over the years, and this evening, that is what I want to expose ourselves to. Just a brief overview of what Ghana's educational system has been. So my presentation will go through this outline. It starts with how the early Europeans came and the schooling system that they tried to operate, and then the missionaries came in. Then we had a full-blown colonization, and then after independence, how far we have come. So in the typical African setup, we train our children informally. So in my culture, we learn how to greet. For instance, if I should come in a local setting, I won't start greeting from there. We start greeting from the right. And these things are not taught in a school setup. You learn in a more or less apprenticeship setting. So you see your uncles, your grandparents, your parents doing it, and you follow suit. So the traditional African setting was one that we learned by imitation and apprenticeship. So you follow your dad or your mom to the farm, to the market, whatever the things that they were into, you also learn. We learned how to socialize the norms and morals of society by imitating what our elders did. The food they ate, we ate same. Where they don't greet, you don't greet. There are things that they won't explicitly tell you, but you learn by observing them. That is how the African traditional education was before the Europeans came in. Now, the Europeans came into Gold Coast, as they named it. The Portuguese were the first to come into Ghana now, and they came to the coast of Elmina. And the original name of Elmina is Edina. But when they came, they saw a lot of gold. So they named it Elmina, the mine in Portuguese. And that gave the name Elmina. So when they came, they sort of fraternized with the people. And in order to facilitate trading, they decided to do some form of schooling. And that gave rise to the Castle schools. So the Castle schools were basically for children of the whites and Africans. We call them mulattoes, or some will call them the half-caste. If you are familiar with Ghana, our late president, Jerry Rawlings, had a Ghanaian mother and a Scottish father. He was a typical mulatto. So some of the Europeans got engaged with the African women, and they gave birth to them. They gave birth to children, and they didn't want the children to behave like the other Africans. So they set up schools for them. So the early Castle schools was just for the mulattoes. But then the Europeans were trading with influential Africans, and they also felt that our children need to be able to negotiate our transactions. So some influential Africans started sending their children to the Castle schools. And at this time, we had various tribes that were fighting among themselves, some wanting to get trade opportunities with the whites. For instance, the Asantes were in the hinterlands, the middle of the country. They needed to trade with the Europeans on the coast, and they had to fight their way through. So in order to maintain some of these alliances, the Europeans decided to educate some of the children of the influential chiefs so that it will serve as some kind of pact. So the castle schools were not open to everybody, no. Mulattoes were the first choice, followed by sons of influential chiefs, and then the merchants who could pay. And basically they were training the children in what we call the 3 R's: arithmetic, reading, and writing, in order to serve as negotiators between the Europeans and the people along the coast. Then most of the Europeans came with missionaries, so they felt they should add religious studies to it. So they added Bible studies to the school system in the castles, with the hope that they will Christianize the young ones, which will lead to an evolution of the religious style among the Africans. So when the Europeans came, it was the traditional African religion, but through the castle schools, some of the young ones that were educated started having Christianity as their religion. It was one of the things that prevented the Asantes from being educated at the early stages, because they felt that the children in the castle schools were becoming too westernized. They were not dressing like them. They saw themselves as different from the local ones, so they prevented the Europeans from educating their children. So we had the castle schools that went on for some time, and the Portuguese came, the Dutch came, the Danes from Denmark, then the British came. And along the coast of Ghana, from Axim to Volta region, you have all these castles and forts along the coast. And these Europeans were educating children in these coasts. But the major issue with that was funding. How do you pay the teachers? And how do you sustain the curriculum? So the merchants that were sponsoring some of the education felt that when my ward has learned the English and can speak and can do basic arithmetic, why should I continue keeping him or her there? Then they send them out. So funding became very problematic because various Europeans were doing their thing on their own. So the castle schools were not so much effective in educating the general populace, but they were able to leave landmarks. For instance, the Dutch sent some of their brilliant students, mostly mulattoes, to Holland. So we have Jacobus Kapitein, who had doctorate degree way back in the 1740s. So he was an African, he had an African mother and a European father. So they sent him out, and he returned to help with the castle schools. Some went and didn't come back. They enjoyed their Western life. So the castle schools were thriving along the line, but the impact was not being felt. And the missions that had then come with the merchants decided to take over. So they moved from the castle schools to the missionaries. And even though they were still schooling, doing the schooling process mostly in the castles, this time around, it was mission-oriented. So the Society for Propagating of the Gospel came from England, and it was the Church of England that people came from, and they wanted to Christianize and at the same time educate the children. but their impact was not so great. The Anglican Church couldn't survive in the coast because most of the missionaries that came died within 6 months. Malaria was the #1 killer, and then I think yellow fever. So they couldn't survive well within the first 50 years or so in the Gold Coast. But when the Wesleyan mission came, the Basel mission came, then the Anglican came back. And this time around, people had maneuvered their way through. So there were some native concoctions that helped some of the whites to survive. And they were taking them, so they were able to stay. So we moved from the castle schools to the missions. And the Anglican Church has a lot of schools in Ghana now. In fact, let me make this point. Most of our big secondary schools were set up by the missions. Yes. And they have maintained relationships. So now we call them the government-assisted schools. The missions have a role to play, but the government pays salaries of teachers. So, for instance, I attended a Catholic school. You must be a Catholic before you be appointed as the head teacher. And there is a huge chapel there. There is a chaplain in the school. You follow the Catholic liturgy. It doesn't matter whether you're a Muslim or not. As far as in that school, the government allows them to do certain things. But the ultimate curriculum, teacher payment, and all that rests with the government. So we have that collaboration. So we have the solely government schools and we have the mission schools running alongside. So the Anglicans came, and based on the foundation that had been set by the Wesleyan and the Basel mission, they now survived. And from 1904, they were able to set up schools. So the first school the Anglican set is known as the Adisade College. It's an all-boys high school in Cape Coast. And the Anglicans didn't just stay at the coast. They moved to the Ashanti region. So they have colleges of education across the country. The dominant one is the St. Monica's. Oh, all right. So they have the St. Monica's High School. This is an all-girls senior high school. And an all-girls college of education where teachers are trained for the basic education level. And this is an all-boys senior high school. This is in Cape Coast. These two are in Ashanti region in a town they call Mampong. In fact, when you go to this place, they set up an educational asylum, as you call them. So they had right from basic to the tertiary. You have the St. Monica Primary, the SHS, and then the College of Education. So when the girls enter that school, by the time they graduate, they come out as trained teachers that could either go to another Anglican unit and teach and what have you. So that is the Anglican mission. I don't know if questions will come as I'm going, or I have to finish and then I take questions. Which way will be best? I should finish and then take questions?
Whatever you're comfortable. If people want to, if you feel comfortable with people asking.
Yeah, that will be fine. Okay. Whichever one that you want.
No, I think the latter will be fine.
Okay, so note now your questions and then we can take it from there. All right, that's awesome. So then the Basel mission, this mission set the stage for all the others. And they were specifically called in by the Danish leadership way back in the Gold Coast. They came in as early as 1828. And then one of the things you should take note is that while these things were going on, there were tribal wars and Anglo-Ashanti wars. The Ashantis were quite troublesome. We had a lot of wars with about 5 wars with the British. The first 2 Ashantis won, and the rest they won, and then they were able to bring the the various tribes together to form the country. So in Ghana, we are different tribes that have been put together to form a country. Good. So the Basel mission came. And even though the Danish were settled along the coast in Accra, These people didn't stay in Accra. They moved into the hinterlands. That was very, very unique because those who came, the Portuguese that came earlier, the SPG, were all along the coast until these people moved into the hinterlands. And along the line, my last slide is on the medium of instruction in Ghana. The Castile schools, the medium of instruction there was English. But when the Basel came, they felt that people think in their local dialect. So why don't we convert our literature into the local dialect? So they were the first group of missionaries to convert the Bible to Tree, the reading and writing materials to the local dialect, and in their liturgy, they used the local dialect. So in the Basel schools, they were teaching their children with Tree. So they managed, I don't know how they did it, they managed to transcribe the English text to Tree. And most of them were priests that knew a lot of languages, Latin and all those stuff. So they felt that teaching ought to be done in the local dialect. So they converted their text into Tree. And when they were setting schools, they made sure that they had enough for the girls. So the first girls' school in Ghana, Abri Girls, was set up by the Basel Mission. It was solely a girls' high school. It is still there. And then these people were unique in terms of their education. They were not only looking at Christianizing the locals, but giving them an education that is run by the locals. So they were not bringing teachers from Denmark, but rather they set up training school where they will pick the locals that are good and train them as teachers so that the locals will teach the schools that they were setting up. So they were the first mission to set up more or less a tertiary institution in Ghana. They call it the Presbyterian Training College at the Kriapim Mampong. So wherever they went, they will set up a secondary school and accompanying teacher training school so that the teachers that will be trained will come and feed into their schools. So in Ghana, aside the Ministry of Education, all these missions have educational units. So we have the Anglican Education Unit, the Presbyterian Education Unit, the Catholic Education Unit that runs the various things that they do in their schools. So they started training the girls and set up various schools. And this is an all-girls College of Education at Agogo. This is an all-girls high school, Abri Girls. This is an all-boys secondary school, Presbyterian Secondary School in Accra. It's one of the topmost secondary schools in Ghana. Yeah, Presec is very good. And this is the first training college in Ghana, Presbyterian Training College, that was set up by the Basel Mission. And their goal, as I've said earlier, was to produce local teachers that can teach the children. And one of the things that they also did was that the teachers were not just teachers, they were also catechists for their churches. So in those days, the teaching profession was highly regarded because the teacher was a catechist, could be the secretary to the chief, could be the opinion leader. When there is any visitor in the community, he will receive the person and interpret for the chief and what have you. So teachers were highly regarded. Those are not now. Teaching doesn't pay in Ghana that much. Yeah. So the Presbyterian mission did very well. And then the Wesleyan mission came in. So the Basel came in 1828. The Wesleyan came in 1835. And the Wesleyan started teaching with English. But then, because they were along the coast, they solicited the books that have been transcribed by the Basel into Twi, and they converted it into Fanti. Now, the Twi and Fanti belong to the Akan group of language. there are few differences. When Fanti speaks, I will understand. When I speak, he or she will understand. But there are petty differences. For instance, they have the Z alphabet. The tree or the Asante does not have the Z alphabet. So the Fanti will say Z, D-Z-I, means it. The tree person or the Asante will say D without the Z. So converting the tree to Fanti was not that difficult. It was just putting some Z here and there, taking some words here, and then they were able to do that. And the Wesleyan mission was very innovative in the setting up of their schools. They started with the girls' school, and they were teaching them dressmaking, sewing, home economics, that kind of stuff. And then they set up a boys' school where they were giving them the grammar education, arithmetic, and what have you. But some of the locals felt that products of the boys' school felt that they were not getting much, the students were not getting much, so they separated from the mother church and the school and set up what they call Fancy Pim School. So when the church saw the division, they merged the two schools. So in Fancy Pim School in Cape Coast is also one of the leading schools in Ghana, high schools, and it's an all-boys. That's the school that Kofi Annan attended. Yeah. So it's an all-boys Wesleyan Methodist school. And then we have the girls' side that is known as the Wesley High Girls. It's an all-girls high school. So sometimes some people complain about gender inequality in educational system in Ghana. Some of us that are there said, well, does it really exist? Because we have some of the top-notch high schools being all-girls high school that are far better than some of the boys' schools and all that. And in that school, they do all the programs. The STEM programs are there. The business programs are also there. So by 1880, the Wesleyan had more schools than the Basel. I think they had more funding from the church in England. So they opened more schools along the coast. They were mostly along the coast. It was later on that they moved into the interior parts of the country. There are some of the schools, yeah. So that is the Wesley Girls High School in Cape Coast. It's very difficult to get in. It's an elite school. If it's a public school. All these schools are public schools. Yeah. But in Ghana, we have a placement system where at the elementary level, we all write the same exams with Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Gambia, and Liberia. That is the WAEC, West African Examination Council. So based on your performance, you get selected into a school. So before you write the exams, you pick a school of your choice. If you meet their requirements, then they will admit you. These schools will pick the creme de la creme. So we look out for the best 6 subjects, meaning that the highest score will be 600, and they'll pick 450 to 600. And then they pick the best. Yeah. And this is the Wesley College. This one is in Kumasi. When the Asantes now opened up, the Wesleyan mission set up a college of education in Kumasi. So this is a very good, this is a co-educational setup for both males and females. College of education, where we train teachers for the basic level. So in Ghana, the colleges of education train teachers for the elementary level. And then the universities, where, like the University of Cape Coast, where I am, we train for the secondary or the K-12, and then some of them come for their master's program, and then they will go and teach in the colleges of education. Good. So when the Wesleyan left, oh no, they didn't leave. Whilst they were there, the Catholics came. In fact, the Catholics came with the Portuguese originally. But the Portuguese didn't survive long in Ghana or Gold Coast. They were moved out by the Dutch. So they left with their missions. But when the Basel mission came, the Wesleyan mission came, and things were stabilized, the Catholics came in 1880. But then, by 1880, all the tribes have come under British rule, some way, somehow. The final notch happened in 1900 when an Asante woman took arms to rebel. That is the Yasantua. I don't know if you have heard of Yasantua. Yeah, when the king of Ashanti was exiled, she decided to rebel, and then they were able to conquer the Asantes, and then finally the whole country came under the British rule. But initially, the hinterlands were not under the British colony. In fact, that happened in 1840 when the coastal tribes decided that they wanted some form of protection from the Asantes. So we have what we call the Bond of 1844. So the coastal tribes willingly, if I can put it that way, decided to be under the British protection. But the Asantes were conquered. The Asantes rebelled and they were fighting the other tribes and the British until finally in 1874, they lost a massive war and the king was exiled to Seychelles Island, and then the Ashanti became part of the colony of Britain. So the Catholics returned in 1880, and it's very interesting that when they came, I think they had a lot of funding from the church, so they spread quickly. So most of their schools happened within the 1900s. From 1900 to 1956, they had spread across every breadth of the country, from the coastal lands of Cape Coast to Accra to Ashanti region to the north, where the Basel and the Wesleyan mission had not even gone. So even though the Catholics more or less came in late, they were able to spread quickly. And maybe the texts, the local language are developed, and then they also had the funds to set up schools. So the Catholics will always have some form of affiliation with a saint. So this is an all-girls high school in Kumasi. It's called St. Louis Senior High School. This is the first secondary school they set up. It's in Cape Coast. It's called St. Augustine's College. And that served as a model. Oh, you're an Absunian, eh? Yeah, that's good. All right, good. So that was the first senior high school they set in the country. And based on that model, they set up my school. This is my school. I went to Pokuari School. Yeah. And they set up that. And they also set up a college of education. This one is also in Cape Coast, Our Ladies of Apostles College of Education. This one is an all-female college of education. In fact, in Ghana, we have more all-female colleges of education than all-males colleges of education. I think the all-males is only one in the north also. The others are co-educational. But we have about 4 or 5, St. Monica, St. Louis, Agogo, St. Teresa's in Ho. Yeah. 4 colleges of education, that is all female. So the Catholics came in, and one of the things they did was making sure that in each of the schools that they put up, they'll put up their chapel there. So you anytime you enter any Catholic school, you see a chapel. And they will make sure that whilst learning your English grammar and whatever, the Catholic liturgy will also be performed, and then you follow suit. Yep. So, up until this time, the 1880s or the bond of 1844, education was run in Ghana by the missions on their own without any centralized system, because the various merchants were in the various castles. The Danes were in Accra, the Dutch were in Elmina, the British or the English were in Cape Coast, but then the English booted out the Dutch, and then the Danes sold their castle and left. So by 1844-45, it was only left with the British in Gold Coast, and therefore they were running the show, and they managed to pull all the missions together such that there will be a central government overseeing the schools. But here, what they were doing was just giving some funds to the missions. There wasn't any laid down curriculum that they were following. So the missions did what they felt was important. So the first education ordinance in Ghana was established in 1852. Here, the aim was to increase the training of locals as teachers, because they felt that the children were at home when they see a local, an uncle teaching them as compared to a white man teaching them. So they wanted to train more teachers to take charge of the schools. Then they wanted to move from the grammar education to technical and agriculture. How were they going to fund that? They wanted to tax the people. So there was what we call the pool land tax. They wanted to collect taxes from landowners and what have you to fund education. And the people were not interested. No. Some people felt, well, I'm not sending my ward to school, so why should I pay any tax? So it became a big hula baloo, and then they revolted. So the system was not working well, and they left it to the missions to do their own thing. Then there was the Phil Stokes Committee in the United States that looked at the education in the colonies of the Westerners in Africa. And I recommended that there ought to be a systematic centralized education in the colonies. So there was another educational ordinance, and this time around, they wanted an inspector of schools, board of education, and grants to be paid. Now, Sierra Leone had Forabe College. That was more or less like a university standard school, and they had a principal, and then they appointed that principal to look at the various colonies, Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and it was too much for the man. So it didn't work. Then they wanted to pay back the grants to the schools based on the number of courses that schools were running. So in order to attract funds, the missions were running courses that were not important, in quotes. So anything that they can run, they will put it up in order to attract grants. And the government felt that is not helpful. So that one too didn't work. Then another one came in 1887. This time around, they tried to correct the errors of the 1882 ordinance. They appointed a director of education. This time around was local. Now they separated the schools. They wanted two types of education. You can have the mission schools, and this time around, government, that's the colonial government, will set up schools. Up till now, the schools had been set up by the missions, and the government was trying to give them grants. Now the government said that, okay, we will set up public primary schools. The mission schools can run. The public schools can run. We will assist the mission schools, but based on their resource. What are the things that we are doing? How effective are they? How are the products coming up? Are they meeting the standards that we want them to meet? So we had a payment by resource. And that was very hectic because the education now moved from being practical to grammar and rote learning so that they can meet the standards. And the one wasn't working so well, and it worked down back and forth until 1919, when the British appointed a governor who was trained. He was a Canadian-born, trained in Canada, was a military man, and was posted to the Gold Coast. He's known as, he's called Gordon Gudgesberg, Sir Gordon Gudgesberg. So when Gudgesberg came, he changed the educational system in Ghana. In fact, most of the government schools that came up pre-independence happened under Godisberg. It was after him that Nkrumah came and decided to expand education. So Godisberg set up what he called 16 principles of education, beautiful principles, some very controversial. The most controversial one was education cannot be compulsory nor free. Education cannot be compulsory nor free. All along, the missions were forcing children to go to school. But he came and said education cannot be compulsory and it will not be free. So parents ought to pay. Even though he advocated for universal primary education, he said that you have to pay. And he advocated for government-run senior high schools. So the first college that came from him was what was known as the Prince of Wales College, later on converted to what is known as Achimota College now. Yeah, it was a co-educational institution. And he also made it mandatory that government schools ought to be co-educational. The missions were setting up boys, girls, but Godisberg said it ought to be co-educational. It ought to be secular in nature. So even though it is a mission school, the curriculum ought to be secular. So it doesn't matter whether the person belongs to your church, the person should have the liberty to attend that school and all that. So there were a lot of things, and he started the first university in Ghana. So he set up the Achimota College and the Achimota Technical College, which metamorphosized into University of Ghana later on. Yeah. So that's fine. So Godisberg was able to drive education in a way that none of the previous governors had done. Set up more government-run schools, increased access by building more schools on one hand, by limiting access by allowing parents to pay. Because he said education cannot be free. So the schools were being built, but it was taking the wealthy to access it. So this ran until they can't hear me.
I think that.
My turn is not working.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, those online. I didn't know that. So Godisberg was leading the construction of schools, but its actual access, that is the students going in, was being limited because parents were expected to pay. So this went on until the freedom movement started kicking in. By 1948, Nkrumah and J.B. Danko and others had come in, and there was a strong movement for self-government now. And Nkrumah won the elections, and in 1951, they allowed the locals to take charge. So Nkrumah came in with the accelerated development plan of education. And one of the first things he did was that education ought to be free and compulsory. And he wanted to improve teacher training, more government schools. That was when Ghana National College and the district schools were set up. And there was access to schools because now it was free and Ghanaians were in control of the educational setup. So the directors of education were Ghanaians, principals of colleges were now Ghanaians and all that. So there was massive drive in education under the Accelerated Development Plan. And this went on to 1961, where we had an Education Act. The Accelerated Development Plan wasn't for education alone. There were other socioeconomic issues, factories and all that. I just carved out the education part. But in 1961, we had an Education Act giving legal backing to the directors that were appointed, the head teachers, and all that. And middle school became free. But Nkrumah didn't live long as the president of Ghana, so he was overthrew in 1966. In fact, most of his plans didn't come to fruition. So from 1966 to 1981, Ghana had a lot of military interventions. So every 2 years, we are experiencing coup d'etat. So each successive government decided to tinker with education. By 1961, we were following the British system of education. 6 years primary school, 4 years middle school, 5 years ordinary level, 2 years sixth form. So it will take you 17 years to complete pre-tertiary, and then 3 years tertiary. By 1987, we had converted. In fact, the first committee that tinkered with the years was the Jobo Committee in 1972. They reduced the years from 17 to 13. So they chucked off 5 years from the high school. Instead of 5 and 2, they made it 4. And the middle school, they made it 3. So that you spend 13 years pre-tertiary. And the Jobo Committee, by 1974, the government that brought it had been overthrown. So schools were not able to go through the 30 years. They reverted to the old British system. Then Jerry Rawlings came into power, 79, 81. And by 87, the economy of Ghana had stabilized a bit. World Bank had come in, IMF had come in, the structural adjustment programs had been initiated, and therefore he had some financial backing to reform education. So he tried to implement the 1972 recommendation. And this time around, he reduced the 13 years by 1 more year to 12 years. So we had 6 years primary school, 3 years middle school or junior secondary, and 3 years senior high school. And then you go to tertiary for 4 years. And that is what is still being run. So aside that, he also implemented a free compulsory universal basic education. It's called F-Cube. And this one has been institutionalized and put in our constitution that we should have free universal basic education. The current government has added secondary education to that. I'll speak briefly on that. So we have been running the 12 years till now. So the current structure of Ghana's education system, we have the basic level. We have added the kindergarten, 1 to 2 years, primary, 6 years, JHS. At the end of the JHS, we sit for a national exams. Based on your performance, you move into a secondary school of your choice. So whilst you are preparing for the exams, you select the school. And based on your score, the school will pick you or not. During my time, it was manual. The schools will gather your results will be brought, and then they will have students that selected particular school, and then they will pick them whether you met the requirement. Now it is computerized. So we call it the computer placement system. Based on your raw score and the school you selected, you'll be placed there. Then you move into the secondary education. And our secondary education is tracked right from the word go. So we have the science track, the business track, general arts track, visual arts track. Some schools have the agricultural science track. We have the technical track, and then we have the home economics track. There are some schools that combine secondary and technical. So we call them senior high technical schools. There are some schools that are purely secondary. We call them senior high schools. So based on your performance here, you move into tertiary. Not all of them are 4 years. The university degree University programs are 4 years, but we have colleges of nursing, nursing and midwifery colleges that you spend 3 years, you get a diploma in nursing or midwifery and you practice. You can also do the same nursing program at the degree level, and that one will be 4 years. So any degree program is 4 years, and then the diploma is 3 years. There is an ongoing, I think I've mentioned this, there is an ongoing reforms right now where we are looking forward to having the basic education terminating at the high school level. What is happening is that the basic education terminates at the junior high school level now. But the reforms that are going on aims to have the basic terminating at senior high school level. So that at the end of the senior high school level, if you want to move into a world of work, you can move in. If you want to go into the tertiary, then you can move into the. So the current reforms have made the senior high school free. So in Ghana now, students at the senior high school don't pay any fees. It's very political. How they are funding it, we don't know. The opposition is always talking about review. Government should review the policy because it's draining the economy. The government made it a political promise, so he is unwilling to touch it. Educationists are divided, something that the wholesale access is affecting quality. Others think that is giving room to some of the students from deprived areas and poor or low socioeconomic background to get access to some of these top senior high schools if they meet the requirement. Previously, where we paid fees, some students could get their score that can earn them access to a good senior high school, but their parents couldn't afford the fees. And so therefore, they lost their spot. But now, if you meet the requirement, you're not paying anything, so just pass, and then you go to any secondary school of your choice. My last slide is on the medium of instruction in Ghana. So Ghana, we have about 46 spoken languages. Out of the 46, now 11 are written and learned in schools. So what we do currently we do the English as the medium of instruction. No, now we do Ghanaian language to basic 3, yeah. We do Ghanaian language. So the language in your locality is what is used as a medium of instruction in the first 3 years of your schooling. That is grade 1, 2, and 3. Then and English will be taught as a subject. Then from grade 4, English is used as a medium of instruction. The local dialect is taught as a subject.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Maybe I need that we will interact.
That's fine.
So from the 2007 to present, right? So you mean currently in Ghana, from class 1 to class 3, the language of instructions and local language, I wasn't clear.
Yes.
And that is what has been going on since 2007.
Yes.
But good schools did that because I schooled in Tera for my whole life, and it was English throughout. Of course, you can say it was a private school, but
You did primary school?
private school.
No. So 2007, were you in basic class 1?
2007, I was in St. Augustine.
No. I'm talking about this is grade 1.
Grade 1.
Yes, that is P1. Primary 1.
Okay.
So the lower primary, from crèche, kindergarten.
Okay, not class 1.
Kindergarten, class 1, class 2, class 3. The medium of instruction now is the local dialect in your locality. And English is taught as a subject.
So both private and public schools.
Yes, but you know the private schools will do their own thing. Yeah. You're welcome. That's fine. So we have dilly-dallied with the medium of instruction. And it's a huge issue. It's a very big issue. Aside the controversial nature of the policy, one of the things that is affecting the policy is that we post teachers nationally. So when a teacher graduates from, let's say, University of Cape Coast Basic Education Program or St. Monica's College of Education, even though it's in Mampong, the teacher can be posted to Tamale in the north, where the teacher may not even know one word of the local dialect. And we expect that teacher, if he's at the lower end, to teach in the local dialect. So those teachers end up teaching with English. So we post teachers nationally. So this policy has been very difficult to implement because teachers themselves may not be well versed in that local dialect. So an interesting thing, as you mentioned, Accra. You know, Accra is the capital city, is cosmopolitan. And even though it's a land of the Gans, and we expect that the local dialect will be Gan, there are some communities in Accra that use Twi to teach. Because it's predominantly a Akan community. So you go to Dansoman and other places, they use Twi. And then at the JHS level, the students will register the Twi and sit for the exams instead of writing Gan. So the medium of instruction in Ghana is very, very interesting. We have moved in from the local to the English, and now here we are using the local dialect to class grade 3. From grade 3 to the university level, it is English. And that is how Ghana's educational system has evolved over the years. And we are hoping that things will improve, and things keep improving. And there are reforms that are ongoing. One of the things that has been done is that we've moved from the objective-based curriculum to standard-based curriculum at the lower end, and we are hoping that students will pick some of the core competencies that have been developed, and that is how it is. Thank you very much.